And good afternoon, Professor Shady. Good to have you with us today. Looking forward to this talk. And thanks, Dr. George, for organizing this. So many of you are familiar with Professor Shady, obviously, but what I'm going to do is to introduce Professor Shady in a quick way. I'm sure he has a lot of way more than this to offer, but I'm just going to give you a brief introduction about Professor Shady. So Professor Shady graduated from the National Institute of Fine Arts in Beirut with a master's degree in architecture and interior architecture. He joined AD's School of Architecture in spring 2013. In 2020 and 2020, Professor Shady received his accreditation as a teacher at the School of Islamic Geometric Design of Halifax, UK. And Professor Shady's teaching philosophy starts in the classroom with the notion that education is imperative to maintain a respect for human life, safety, and welfare. He believes embracing the psychology, art, and science of interior design is the core of professional education. This is a very brief introduction about Professor Shady that has a lot more than this to offer and to talk about. Personally, I'm looking forward to this talk. If anyone who has questions to Professor Shady, please, if you have any questions regarding anything mentioned in the presentation, I'm going to list Professor Shady's email address in the chat. So feel free to send an email to Professor Shady and he'll be more than happy to answer your questions. That's all from my side for now, and I'll give you and close this later on once Professor Shady is done with his talk. I'm looking forward to this also. So Professor Shady, the stage is yours. I'm done from my side.
Thank you, Professor Mohanad, and for the introduction. And thank you also, Dr. George, for giving me the chance to be part of the CRID Webinar Series. Actually, what I would like to do during this session is to give you an introduction to Islamic geometric design. So next time you see a pattern, you'll be able to understand what you are looking at and categorize it. Let me first start with the little introduction about the Islamic art in general. I'm going to share my screen and we will go with the slides. Can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Right. So Islamic art is not art of a specific religion, time, place, or a single medium. Instead, it spans around 1,400 years. It covers many lands and population and includes a range of artistic fields, including architecture, calligraphy, painting, glass, ceramic, textiles, and so on. What you see here in this first slide is the three distinct disciplines that underpins Islamic art. I would like to talk first about the Arabic calligraphy. This is the proportioned alphabet, and it is the artistic practice of handwriting and calligraphy based on the Arabic alphabet. It is also known in Arabic as khat, derived from the word line, design, or construction. Al-Khat al-Kufi, or the Kufic, is the oldest form of the Arabic script. Arabic calligraphy was originally a tool for communication, but with time it began to be used in architecture, decoration, and even in coin design. The second one is the biomorphic art, also known as arabesque. It's a very familiar word, which is a floral pattern representing the underlying order and unity of nature. They are evident throughout the artwork of various cultures within the Islamic world, from Morocco all the way to the Far East. There are a variety of different styles of arabesque with the Islamic art, but they all follow the same principle: the eternal spiral, symmetry and structure, and the rhythm and the balance. Geometry, which is our topic for today, it's a common feature of Islamic art, is the covering of surfaces with geometric pattern. This use of geometry is thought to reflect the language of the universe and help the believer to reflect on life and the greatness of creation. In Islamic culture, usually the patterns are believed to be the bridge to the spiritual realm, the instrument to purify the mind and the soul as well. All Islamic geometric patterns are based on a circle. The circle symbolizes unity and diversity in nature. And that, of course, definitely the word geometry comes from the ancient Greek. Geo means earth and metron means measurement. It is a branch of mathematics concerned with question of shapes, sizes, relative position of figures, and properties of space. I'll move on to the topic now. So, family tree. Of all the slides that we will be looking at today, if you only remember one, try to remember this one. It's going probably to be a little bit, intense later on, but it's worth having a look on what's happening in the sacred geometry. This shows you the Islamic geometric design family trees. So every pattern starts with a circle. And the first creative choice that craftsmen made for hundreds of years is into how many sections the circle is divided. A 4-section, as we see on the left side of the illustration, this makes a 4-fold pattern. 4-fold patterns are used a lot in modern design and architecture. They fit perfectly into square. 4-fold patterns are very common in Morocco. We find them in the madrasas of Fez and also in Marrakesh, as well as in Alhambra Palace in Andalusia. The other choice is to divide the circle into 6 equal sections. That creates a category called 6-fold geometric design. It gives us a 6-pointed star, 12-pointed star, a hexagon, which is a 6-sided polygon, and so on, as you can see in the bottom right of the diagram. Actually, 6-fold geometric design has the greatest richness of all patterns. So many different designs of 6-fold patterns are present in architecture through the Islamic world. The third category is 5-fold geometric design, as you can see in the center. This is when we divide the circle into 5 equal sections, 10 equal sections, and the pentagon, which is a regular polygon that has 5 sides and 5 angles. It is probably the category that offers the greatest creative opportunity and challenges for designers. Over 100 of years of history, we see craftsmen choose to work with this category when they want to experience challenges and come up with interesting design and patterns. Islamic geometric design have visible and invisible layers. What we see in this slide is the invisible layer, which made out of grids. All geometric design composition are based on different grids that enable the patterns to happen. So I have here on the screen 3 grids that they are related to the family tree. 4-fold pattern can be created in a grid of squares, which is the most simple grid that can be used for fold pattern. And the principle is to create a pattern in a square and tessellate it in a grid to form a bigger composition. For 6-fold geometric design, the grid is tessellated with hexagons, as we see on the right, and the middle diagram shows you 5-fold grid, which is a repetition of pentagons that do not tessellate. Notice the gaps, unlike the 4-fold and 6-fold grid that can infinitely tessellated. However, I can say here that craftsmen love to work with this 5-fold geometric design where they have the opportunity to be creative and to come up with combination of other shapes, which make the 5-fold geometric design a unique creative pattern. How do we know now what kind of pattern we're looking at? A fourfold, a sixfold, or something else? The answer actually is to count identical shapes such as petals around the center star. The majority of geometric patterns have those numbers of repeated shapes, and by counting them tells you what kind of Islamic geometric patterns you are looking at. In the slides, the star is surrounded by 8 petals. That means it is a fourfold pattern. If it has 10, that would make it fivefold pattern. If we look next, if we look at this slide also here, we count 12 petals, so it is a sixfold pattern. Also, you can notice the hexagon shape and the composition that tell you it is a sixfold pattern as well. In most of the cases, the count of the petals identify the patterns. Moving forward. So if we have a look at this very interesting Quran box of Selim II from the mid-16th century, it is indeed an Ottoman work of art. We can count 10 petals around the star at the center of the composition, which makes it a fivefold pattern. Also, you can see quarter of the star at each corner. Those stars will form 10 petals if completed. Delhi. Let's have a look on this picture from Fatehpur Sikri in Delhi from the 17th century and try to understand the purpose of the grid. This composition has a pattern of several stars, and by counting 8 petals, we identify a fourfold pattern. This fourfold pattern has an invisible layer made out of squares. So let's imagine this grid behind the pattern as shown on the right picture, which have been used to create this composition. The purpose of those grids actually is to allow us to design a pattern into the correct scale. So practically, if this composition sits on a building, it has to have a particular width and height to fit perfectly. It has to be designed in a particular way that the corners have quarter stars at the side and half stars, which makes it a great evidence of excellence in Islamic geometric design. Best practice is saying that the margin of the widths have to have 2 squares widths that define the size of the pattern itself and how big the pattern has to be. So this again all related to the scale. As you can see here in the grid, there is a whole square in the center and 2 half square on either side that makes 2 squares wide, and this determines the size of the circle, which is the base of every pattern. And also it will allow you to know whatever you design will fit perfectly in the composition. That means in this case, quarter stars along the corners and half stars along the sides. Here we see an intricate, a bit complicated pattern in a wooden ceiling at the complex of Sultan Murad II in Bursa. And definitely there's a grid happening at the background. So let's try to discover what that grid is. We notice here a 12-pointed star that also sometimes fit in a grid of squares, and we will be talking about it with the next slide. So I'm going to zoom in here. So this is a close-up, and the red square indicates a mini pattern or a unit design that you can facilitate. And what you see on the right, a Quran page that has the same pattern and is used as standalone composition. It exists often in Islamic art and architecture when typically a pattern can be used in a grid of squares or hexagon tessellated to form a bigger composition, and also could be considered beautiful enough to be a standalone pattern at its own. We come back to Dubai. This is a very interesting screen here from Al Fahidi historical neighborhood. Also, it has a grid happening at the background. So let's have a look on the grid. You have a star design that fits perfectly in a square, and the square is tessellated to form a bigger composition. Tessellation. So just to define it in a very easy way, it's like a copy paste. So this is a good example, and all the patterns are joined together to form a larger composition. This is how grids enable the creation of the patterns all over the world. This picture is from Sadian tomb in Marrakesh, late 16th century. So it consists of a grid of diagonal lines, which is made in a very creative way to make this pattern happen. We have 8 petal star inside a square and another big star pattern that take out 4 squares. The grid helps the pattern to fit perfectly in a certain space. Also, it helps to determine the scale and the proportion of the composition. Again in Marrakesh. So this is from the Ben Yusuf Madrasa, 14th century. By the way, madrasa is an Arabic name for madrasa. It's a madrasa, it means like a school. And in Morocco, it's one of the beautiful patterns, actually. It's one of my favorites. In Morocco, they really like to work with 4-fold pattern composition. The greatest creativity, as I can say, of 4-fold patterns are found in madrasas and mosques also. Let's have a look on the 6-fold now. So they are typically based on a grid of hexagon, and we all know that the hexagon, like a beehive, has a grid, a circle grid that really represents the seed of life or the flower of life. As we can see here, the pattern fits perfectly inside the hexagon on the column on the right side of the screen, and it is tessellated to form a larger composition, as the same principle applies on 4-fold pattern in a grid of square as well. This is a typically a composition that you may see in many parts of the Islamic world, in India, Iran, also it's found in Spain also. And in this case, it is a panel from the Seljuk era, and it is preserved at the Museum of Turkish and Islamic Art in Istanbul. We all know about the Anatolian Seljuks. This design actually doesn't have petal shapes, but we can notice kite shapes around the central stars. And if we count them, we find 12 kites. So it is a 6-fold pattern, and it is tessellated in a grid of hexagon, as we see on the right picture. Again, another 6-fold pattern. Here we can see the same pattern, but in Alhambra Palace in Granada, Spain, and the red hexagon identify the star that it is tessellated to make the composition. And also I would like to highlight that the greatest variety of Islamic geometric design are in 6-fold pattern. There are hundreds of them, but only few are used frequently. We move on to Pakistan. So it was having a look at this beautiful building. This is the tomb of Bibi Jawindi. And I would like to zoom in and talk a little bit about what's happening here. So, as you can see, there are big hexagon shapes in the middle. And this really tells us that it is a six-fold pattern. I want to use this pattern as a way to illustrate how this enormous variety patterns in six-fold geometric design is possible. So let's analyze it. I have here some illustration. As you can see in the top left illustration, it is made out of only one shape, which is an hexagon, and combined with other repetitive hexagons in such a way to form the composition. With this just simple one ingredient, one hexagon overlapping the other, identical one, you can make at least 4 different patterns. And you can see that the examples given here and the ways of how these hexagons overlap each other determine how the pattern will look like. Here are 2 different patterns from the history of Islamic art and architecture. On the left side is the wooden panel from the Abbasid era, and on the right side is a famous stucco in Samarra from the Fatimid era. And we go back to Istanbul. This is a very popular pattern from the Ottoman era. And this photo is from the Blue Mosque, which is the Sultan Ahmad Mosque. Let's have a closer look at this pattern because it offers an amazing opportunity to see how craftsmen were able to be creative in the work process. So if we go back to the pattern that we saw previously at the tomb of Bibi Jawindi in Pakistan, which is made of overlapping hexagons. Hexagons are, of course, 6-sided shapes. Now we can imagine how craftsmen have evolved their creativity by overlapping 12-sided shapes. This is a lot more difficult to draw, but they end up with innovative pattern, as you see in this photo at the Sultan Ahmad Mosque in Istanbul. Maybe it doesn't take lots of effort to turn a pattern from overlapping hexagon to overlapping 12-sided shapes. However, even a slight variation can make a big impact on what this pattern looks like. Back to Cairo. So far, we have seen that grids consist of one shape, such as grid of squares and grid of hexagons, but the real creativity and the complexity can be introduced in a composition when grids are made out of not just one identical shape. As you see here, the grid is the invisible layer, but there is one example where the invisible layer is actually visible at the Sultan Hassan Mosque in Cairo. There is a niche right at the entrance that has geometric composition that shows both the visible and the invisible layer. It is unique and extremely unusual. So let's have a closer look at this composition. This is one of the very rare founds actually, and the niche on the left side of the screen with the white lines of the composition are the visible layer and the black lines are the invisible layer, which are not supposed to be visible actually. You can see also that each shape in the illustration at the right side of the screen has geometric design ingredients. The big octagon in the middle contain 8-pointed star, and the way it is combined with other ingredients to even form quarter stars at the corner, which is quite challenging to scale this composition and to be able to fit in the curve of the niche. This is, I can say this is absolutely a unique composition because it displays both the visible and the invisible layer. What we can see here is a composition that uses a grid with more than one shape, like triangles, squares with 8-pointed stars, also 12-pointed stars as the blue shape indicate. And by combining 3 shapes, you are able to make this intricate composition. I want to highlight the 4 illustrations on the right side of the screen. The top left and the top right patterns only show the visible grid, and we can recognize identical shapes like the pattern only show the visible grid, and the shapes actually, they are like the 8-pointed stars and combined with other shapes as well. But we can also see that the patterns are different, even that they use the same shapes. And so how this is possible actually? How could we make different patterns that share lots of same shapes and look different? The answer is that the grid make the hard work. You can see when you look at the correspondent grid that shows the invisible layer, the squares with 8-pointed stars and the other triangles exist also. And just by playing around by how you arrange these shapes, you can create different patterns. Let's have a look on a 5-fold pattern for the moment. So as I mentioned earlier, different rules apply here for the 5-fold pattern. 5-fold geometric design cannot be tessellated the same way like 4-fold and 6-fold. Let's have a look on this beautiful piece. So traditionally, craftsmen have founded the greatest opportunity to create innovative design and to make new patterns in 5-fold geometric design. Across the century and the Islamic world, you see the challenges of those patterns in 5-fold geometric design. So how does this work, and how were they able to work with those challenging design? Jali, let's have a look at this beautiful screen from India. It's a Jali. You can see that there is 10-fold composition by counting the panel, the petal shapes around the central star. We see quarter stars at the corner and have stars along the horizontal and vertical border. Now, if you want to tessellate this pattern, what options we have? First option is a grid of diagonal lines, as you see the losange shape highlighted in blue, and you can tessellate this shape infinitely. That works well, but it's not enough creative to answer the question as to how this great creativity is possible in 5-fold design. The second option would be to choose another shape that you tessellated, and in this case is a rectangle highlighted here in blue, could be tessellated infinitely to make a bigger composition, and still not enough to create something new. The way you do that is shown in the bottom illustration of 3 different shapes. So we have the 10-sided polygon, pentagons, and 6-sided shapes. Some other variation of the 5-fold. So inside each of these shapes, you have identical ingredients. You put those ingredients into the shapes of the grid, and this is how you end up with a unique composition. More ingredients here. What you can do also is to keep the grid the same, but play with the new ingredients that does into the 3 different shapes. And this is the secret of being creative by using structure of the grid And within that, you experiment with a new different combination, if I can say this. So also, as you can see in the blue shapes, and by putting them together, you end up with a completely different result. One more example here. So, which is the same grip, but it has different ingredients again. And lastly, it is possible also to maintain two shades at the same and change one. You would be able also to get something completely new and different from the previous samples. So the creativity in five-fold design is potential by trying new possibilities. That's how the best art is usually created. I hope that I'm not too fast because I need to cover all the. Okay, so again, five-fold. Let's visit now the Great Mosque of Isfahan in Iran. Next to the mihrab is the wooden mimbar that has a particular backrest with the unique five-fold patterns, as well as the step rises, as you can count 10 pointed stars, so that makes it five-fold geometric design. This is a version of that backrest made by my mentor. Thank you, Eric Braud, also. And you see at the right side one of the composition that displayed the intricate grid. The only way to do this is by being playful and creative to be able to construct something different. This grid allows you to create a unique, beautiful designs. There are limited numbers of shapes that you could use to create this composition, as the wedges shape, 10-sided polygons, arrow shapes, and so on. With those number of different elements, you can create different things by combining them. And of course, not everything will be aesthetically successful, but with this principle, you can create any composition with those forms. When we look at those doors, stunning metal doors from Bursa, Turkey, they are all five-fold patterns, same as most as the doors in Topkapi in Istanbul, also with five-fold patterns and 10 pointed stars. And let's have a look also at this, at the everything category. Everything that it is not four-fold, five-fold, or six-fold. We look first at this wonderful building in Mosul, Iraq. It is the tomb of Imam Yahya. Sadly, this building it doesn't exist anymore, actually. It was destroyed 20 years ago. So this is one of the side panel actually on this building is an unusual geometric composition which has 7 pointed stars. Drawing a 7 pointed star is very difficult. Dividing a circle into 7 equal parts with the compass and the ruler is almost impossible. You can get close to get it right, but you cannot be 100% accurate. So when you see something like this in a composition, it makes you wonder, how did they do it? And how were they able to make 7 pointed star to appear in this composition? Once again, the answer is the grid, as always, that did the hard job. As you can see here in the illustration, this composition can be broken down into squares with patterns inside. Those squares are put together in a tilted way to form gaps in between with triangle shapes. And by joining everything together in a creative way, you end up with a 7 pointed star. The 7 pointed star is actually a coincidence of how the grid is used rather than building the 7-pointed star and work the pattern around it. It's a very unique pattern, actually. Moving to this. So here we see a famous mimbar in Cairo from the early 15th century, which has also interlinked 7-pointed stars, as you see in the top right illustration. What you see a lot in mimbar's composition in Cairo is that the craftsmen tried to create complicated yet exceptional composition where the visual impact is more important than the precision of the composition. Sometimes you have to tweak the composition and squeeze things a little bit to make it work. And what the Mamluks were very good at is to use these kite shapes like the link of the chain. This allowed them to have variation and proportion and help joining all the elements in one composition. Again, everything as category. The dome at Shah Namotallah Valley. It's a shrine in Iran that shows geometric composition on curved surfaces. It is difficult enough to do composition on flat surfaces with 7, 9, or 11 pointed stars, but to do something like this at the exterior or the interior of a dome is absolutely complicated without the help of any software. But nevertheless, in this dome, you can see that they designed difficult pattern of stars, all connected together to form beautiful composition. The way that they did that and applied to all the domes is that they created a slice shape like triangle with the apex at the top of the dome and the base at the bottom of the dome. The slice repeat 8 times, sometimes 16, sometimes less or more, and it covers all the dome. So if we try to figure out where those slices join up, you can always see a bit of weirdness, if I can say it, or something, or sometimes a change in direction where the lines of the slices join up. Another example of, this is from the Anatolian Seljuks. The one on the left is a complex composition carved in stone, and it combines also several stars and patterns, still designed in such a way that you have half stars at the side and quarter stars at the corner. The two illustrations on the right side are from the Mamluk. It's actually a design of a door in Cairo. You can see the composition at the top right, 9-pointed star combined with 11-pointed stars. And the composition on the left has 11-pointed star combined with 13-pointed star, which is very difficult to do. And as you see, it's still designed as made to measure. And to have half stars at the sides, the Mamluk did absolutely unique work by designing complex composition by combining different stars patterns together. This is one of the doors. It's a beautiful picture in Cairo at the complex of Sultan Muayyad that display different star patterns. And lastly, here is a dome interior at this is the Mausoleum of Turabe in Turkmenistan. So where you can see also different star patterns combined. Also, you are able to see where the slices are joined up together since it is a curved surface. The domes in Islamic architecture have wonderful geometric composition. very carefully designed, and the challenge is that the top surface of the dome has less space than the bottom. So you don't want your composition to get too dense as it goes upward. They took this into consideration when creating those patterns. And thank you. I hope this introduction gave you a general insight on Islamic geometric design. I think we still have a couple of minutes. If you have questions, if you have any clarification for later on, please do not hesitate to send email. Muhannad?
Thank you so much, Professor Shady, for this informative talk. Thank you for the examples that you showed us and everything that you explained to us. And I would like to remind everyone who attended us, please, if you do have questions for Professor Shady, feel free to please email Professor Shady on the email address that I sent earlier on the chat. You can find the email in the chat. I'm just going to send it one more time for you guys. Apart from this, thank you again, Professor Shady, for joining us. Thank you, Dr. George, for organizing this. And thank you, everyone who attended this interesting session today. So guys, please, if you have any questions, feel free to contact Professor Shady on the email address. That's all for today. Thank you. I'll see you on the next webinar. Thank you all. And